Welcome back to Beauty Uncovered, sponsored by Olaplex. I'm Danielle Frank, and I want to talk about Father's Day, but more specifically, what do you do when you've lost your father? I was noticing a few years back of posts on different social media, Facebook a lot, but talking about how they lost a parent. This could have been before Mother's Day, Father's Day, any holiday, and how difficult that is to go through. I got to admit, I don't know if I completely understood, especially when it's been like decades since the person passed. And I think once you've lost a parent, you suddenly have that, oh, that's what it feels like. And that's whether you had a fantastic relationship with your parent or not so great. Either way can be painful. So we winded up contacting Dr. Justin Puder, who is on social media. If you go on TikTok or Instagram, it's a modern therapist. He also has a podcast called Drop In with Dr. J. Absolutely enjoy him thoroughly. And I thought he would be a perfect person to have this conversation, especially someone that had lost his father at 19, that we could have a conversation. And how is the best way for us to get through this? How are we supposed to feel? So with that being said, let's get started. Justin, I am so thrilled that you're here. Oh, actually, I never even asked you. Do you prefer Dr. Puder or Justin?
Justin's fine. Yeah.
Okay, I'm so glad that you're here. I was just explaining to Justin that the first time I saw him was on TikTok on the 4th of May. He did a great video that was like, may or may not have resonated with a lot of my friends. And I realized I'm sitting here talking to one of the people that reaches out to people, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wasn't following you. So all of you, if you're listening, definitely go take a look at A Modern Therapist. Fantastic content. Thank you so much for coming on here.
Really appreciate the compliments and, of course, having me on. That means a lot to me.
And you also have your own podcast. I did not realize that until you wrote back. Do you have that in your bio and everything? I didn't even realize.
Yeah, it's relatively new. It's funny how quickly like 20 episodes can stack. But yeah, just started a couple months ago. So stoked about it. Talking about all kinds of different mental health difficulties, especially in the world that we live in right now. There's plenty to talk about.
Well, in my opinion, you're a great communicator. So and definitely worth a check out. And it's Drop In with Dr. J.
That's correct. Yeah.
Awesome. So we're here because we were recently talking, me and my team, we were talking about, hey, what are we going to do for Father's Day? And, as many of our listeners know, and some of my friends, my father passed away about 3 years ago, lived a wonderful, fabulous, long life, 86 years old, but I don't think it really matters, right? I think it doesn't matter when something is wonderful in your life, unconditional love, all of those good things, even one day missed is hard. So I often think about my childhood best friend lost her father when she was all of 9-10 years old, somewhere around there. And I remember years and years later, Father's Day was difficult. Mm-hmm. It was difficult. And I remember thinking, but it was so long ago. Which is, right. I don't think you understand until you go through it. And I know that you've gone through this as well.
Right. I lost my father when I was 19. He died of brain cancer when he was 41. But you're right. This grief is one of those things until you go through it, it's hard to grasp that this bond, this connection that you had with the person, that you long and miss it, no matter how much time has gone by. But certainly like on holidays like Father's Day or their birthday or, Christmas, whatever it might be for you, there's those days that come up that you're like, I'm used to being with this person.
Yes. And I think that this does speak to a larger conversation. It's not just about Father's Day. Of course, it could be Mother's Day, any holiday. And I think that, one of the things that I was hoping we can have a conversation about is one, how do you cope? How do you deal? How do you get through that day where I can't help but sit there and feel like I'm watching all these people just getting that moment that we wish we had.
Yeah. I think one of the most difficult things people run into is when they try to ignore what they're feeling. Of course, as a psychologist, I see this all the time. You come from a family where you weren't allowed to be sad, or you weren't allowed to express certain emotions, or that's just not a norm for you. But especially when it comes to grief, the sadness is real and it's valid. You might be angry, you might be frustrated. There's a whole range of emotions you might feel that day. When I work with people and they're stuck, often they're trying to avoid what they truly feel.
Mm.
Versus when the day comes along and you can mindfully plan for it and know, hey, on this day, I might be a little lower. I might be kind of sad. I might be more reflective and thinking about memories more than usual. For those types of people who tend to avoid their emotions, it's being intentional about how can I sit with my emotions and kind of honor the legacy of this person that's passed. Some people will do something, in memory of that person, like, oh, my dad loved going to the beach, so I'm going to the beach that day. And I'm just going to allow myself to feel whatever comes up.
So you don't think it should be distractionary?
No. There's no.
I might have done that once or twice.
That is what we don't want. There's no therapist, psychologist, mental health professional will tell you avoidance is good. Avoidance is never good for your mental health.
No.
When we tell ourselves, I'm not allowed to be sad, or I don't want to be sad, it works against us. It prolongs and sort of invalidates what we actually feel. And again, everyone right now is probably evaluating how they deal with like sadness or any type of emotion. But that sadness is there for a reason. We need all our emotions there and being able to express them for a reason, because it communicates importance to us. It communicates certain memories or a meaningful bond or connection. So no, not recommending, trying to avoid what you might be feeling or
I don't know. Sometimes it's like you just don't want to marinate in it.
And I that is great. I love the words that you use there, to marinate in it, because a lot of people,
that could be joy or sadness. I mean, it could go either way, but sometimes it's like you feel like you're just stewing and marinating in it.
I think what holds to be true though for most people is when you give yourself permission to feel it, it doesn't tend to last as long as you think it does. Versus psychologically, we know when people try to bury and avoid certain emotions, it certainly prolongs, whether we're talking about grief, trauma, any sort of emotional experience. But yes, does there become a time where it's like, okay, using the beach example, I've been here for a few hours, I've been sad. Is it time for me to get up, move about my day, transition? Sure. There might come that point, but it's a whole different thing when we're going to try to ignore what we feel.
So here's my next question, because I do think as now again, it's very interesting being on both sides of the fence now, right? When you're on that other side of the fence, you have both your parents and you see that your friend is having a hard time with that, or, a relative, whatever it may be. What is the right thing to say? What is the right thing to do for that person if they're asking for help? Because now in retrospect, I'm like, oh God, I'm a jerk. Like,
yeah, you know what? All of us can feel awkward around death because a lot of us can be fixers. We want to fix something, and death is the ultimate. There's nothing to fix. We have to move towards acceptance.
But what's the right thing to say? Because it always feels like nowadays, it's like, you don't want to say, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not enough. It's not enough.
I can feel that, especially even as a therapist. But a lot of times it's just being present with someone. And again, not avoiding the conversation, even asking just transparently, how are you doing today?
Yeah.
How are you feeling today? Often what we need is just the validation that today's hard for me, or today I might be feeling sad. And then in that sadness, 2 minutes later, I might be laughing about a funny memory. But when you have someone come alongside and be present with you in that and be like, I was thinking about your dad today. I wonder what's going on with you, or how's it sitting with you today? That little honoring moment of connection goes a long way for people, because there's no right thing to say. Of course, we're sorry that you lost your father or your loved one. And again, is that the wrong thing to say? No, it's not. But being present beyond that, not just saying, hey, I'm sorry, and walking away. A lot of us want someone to be able to sit beside us, have that coffee, and just spend a couple minutes talking about our loved one.
And with all fairness, I do also think that the work that we do before those big events, that is kind of like putting a big spotlight on that loss, probably contributes a lot to it as well. Because I mean, I will say that I was lucky enough to be able, I have 10 brothers and sisters. So we're always, exchanging conversations about how we're feeling, and the thoughts and the stories and all this stuff. So it makes it a lot easier to kind of process things in some ways. But I do think that therapy does make a huge difference. I do think I have to dive into it a little bit more, but I think it does make a big difference when you're having that kind of loss, to be able to process it when you do have days like this.
Absolutely right. And I was going to say, on the other side, it's okay if you don't feel anything. And that a lot of my clients will ask me that, of like, oh my gosh, it's Father's Day, I don't feel sad. And I would say, honor exactly what you feel, because some days you won't feel sad. Their birthday will come along and you're like, oh, I didn't really feel much. I thought about them. I thought I missed them, but I wasn't, stuck in sadness or feeling depressed or feeling any way like I did maybe a year or two ago. Grief is tricky like that.
That's funny that you said that, because when he first passed, Father's Day came up, didn't faze me.
Mm-hmm.
His birthday in September, which I hadn't celebrated birthday with him in years. Oof. So I planned out everything. I baked a cake, his favorite cake. His mother used to make it for him. And my kids and I all wore different hats, because he used to live with us for a little while. And we wore all his hats and his t-shirts, and we made sure to spill food on our shirt, because he always did. But we would say his little, what is it? When people have sayings, he used to have like some, man alive. He just would say these strange things. So we would all do all these different sayings and stuff. And it was more of a celebration. We called it Pop Pop Day. But but I think that that day it was harder. But then, then another day that you would think it wouldn't be a big deal. And then all of a sudden it is. I guess it's like a strange thing. It does come in waves.
It does. And years can go by for some people where they're like, the last 5 years, I haven't felt anything. And all of a sudden this year.
Yes.
And of course, as a therapist, I like exploring that, but it's also validating that's the grief journey.
Yeah.
That's absolutely it. For most of us, the waves crash harder and are biggest in the beginning, that you kind of feel like it's hard to do everyday activities. I just miss this person so much. And over time, the waves get smaller and smaller. But that's not to say, on like a 10-year anniversary or something like that,
right,
you might feel a lot. And that's totally normal.
It is funny, because I think about my mom when she lost her parents and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't get me wrong, you go through the grief and all that stuff. I think it was when she started to get to certain, I would call almost like milestones in her life.
Right.
And you suddenly have that connection of the milestone that your parent went through or didn't go through. And suddenly you're like, oh, wow. Or maybe you have a completely different understanding of your parent than you did before. And you're like, oh my gosh. And then they're not there. You can't have that conversation.
It's true. And yet a lot of us do well with sort of honoring, in whatever sense, that we can still have that conversation aloud. Of like, a lot of people will either journal or talk aloud and be like, Dad, I wish you're here today with me as I'm graduating. I know that was true for me when I graduated with my doctorate degree. I'm like, oh, my dad would have been so stoked for me to be here. But that day I spoke to him. I'm like, Dad, thank you so much for the ways you encouraged me, instilled hard work in me. It's been such a long journey, spent most of my life in school, but I finally did it. Like, that expression, it leads to a release. And truly, for many of us, no matter what spiritual background you might have or not have, it's a certain connection that it keeps going because you're thinking about that person. And finding a way, in whatever way feels right, through writing and verbalizing it, is a great way that we can continue that bond.
That's so funny. I saw I don't know if you've ever seen it. Andrew Garfield lost his mother. And he
Mhm.
did an interview where they were saying, oh, we heard that you had a big loss and yet you're still here. And he says, forgive me if I tear up. I hope I never lose this grief because of the fact that it is all the unexpressed love I have for that person. And I just went, "Ooh,
So beautiful.
wow,
So beautiful. And
so
so,
powerful, so
yeah.
powerful."
And I know there's people out there who are like, I had a complicated relationship with my father, or they might be like, me and my father were strange, we weren't that close. It's okay to grieve that as well. So certainly all the different relationships we can have with a person, you can still experience grief.
I do want to like talk about that and validate that because I have friends that have lost parents that unfortunately that parent was not there for them. That
Hmm.
parent was not it was not the relationship that you read in stories. And ultimately you're supposed to not feel anything while that they walked out of my life or they did wrong by me or whatever. But the truth is that in many ways you're also grieving what could have been or should have
Right.
been. That's
Absolutely.
hard.
It is definitely hard, and it can feel different. People can be sitting with anger,
Mm.
frustration, and feel sort of an array of other emotions that aren't really sadness. So it is the expression of it as well, though, and being able
And
to
it's
just,
okay to feel it.
it all goes back to that, right? Because when people start looking inward and they're like, oh, today's gonna be hard. A lot of it is, I don't want to feel, whatever emotion I might be sitting with. But you're right that it becomes more complicated and people need to have the space to flush it out. I know many people come into therapy and they're grieving through the anger of like, I was neglected, or again, my father didn't put the time and energy that I know I deserved. And what people end up realizing is that they have a lot of other types of connections in their life that
Mhm.
can start to fulfill like a fatherly or wisdom or kind of figure that maybe they didn't get that energy from their actual, biological father.
And as friends, it's a good idea to just make space for that because
Absolutely.
yeah, because I mean, even though we all know these people and oh, they had a contentious relationship, whatever, it doesn't matter. A loss is a loss.
It absolutely, I'm so glad you said that, because again, if you haven't been through grief, some people on the outside might be like, oh, you weren't that close with them. And it's like, that is absolutely not how grief works.
No,
It's
no, it
not
doesn't.
always a product of how close you were. We can lose people in our lives that, again, we're mourning and losing the loss of what we wish we had.
Right. No, I think that's the big one for me is like I said, I've seen a few friends where it was like, ooh, it was the loss of what could have been, what should have been, what you wanted, and unfortunately did not get. Oh,
Absolutely.
wow. So
Yeah.
I am so grateful for this conversation because I really do think that I think it helps a lot of people, myself included. Thank you so much for coming on today because it's hard getting through this stuff.
It is. And even that needs validated. That
Mhm.
day we're allowed to have hard days, and honoring that again allows us to move forward. And for many of us, keep a legacy alive of someone that we love.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on, Justin. And everybody, be sure to take a look at all of his social media channels and the podcast. And I'm going to tune in tonight because that's exciting. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.